Folks, I usually let the flag build so that people come in, but because I'm doing this early, I'm not going to be letting it build that easy, or build that long, I should say. So we're about to do we're about to kick off. I'm not going to let it wait that long. I just want to watch it. What I normally try to do is I try to make sure everything comes online. I got Periscope online. I'm going to wait for DLive and Twitch. Once I get DLive and Twitch to come online, I'll kick off. Twitch is on. All right, DLive, are you good? Once everything connects and I get a lot of people on, we'll go. But this is going to be the broadcast for this evening, and I wanted to talk that way you guys understand it, because a lot of people are just like, oh, you just got a flag on. Well, I normally let it build until I do 6 o'clock, but we're a bit early because I have T-ball tonight. But this is going to be a cool one. This is going to be one where I get to talk about stuff that I don't normally talk about. It's going to be a little bit more in depth. While I'm waiting for DLive, come on DLive, where you at? DLive is still sending the data, so I want to know if I'm wrong on DLive. I'm going to get my markers, because we're going to have a whiteboard. DLive's not talking to me. Alright, I'm going to have to check that. But I'm going to get the markers out first, so I don't do this during the broadcast. And then if you guys are watching live, I push the record button, and then whenever I hit the record button, that's the thing that I upload to Rumble, and I'll upload that to Brighteon and all sorts of other stuff. So here we go. Alright, I still don't have DLive, but that's alright. I'm tired of waiting. So let's rock. I just hit the record button, and now I'll hit the intro button, and here we go. That's right. It is Wednesday. We're going to be doing it a little bit earlier today. It's June 9th, with an F, June 9th, 2021. I'm Jarrin Jackson. I love America. My bias, as always, I'm a Bible-believing Christian. Constitutional defending, patriotic, Rush baby, Lynn, multiple time endorsed Trump supporter. The Bible is the Word of God. The gospel is the power to salvation. That means the death, the burial, the resurrection is the only way to not go to hell. And you get to go to heaven and have a relationship with Jesus for all time. Please repent and believe the gospel. You don't know whenever you're going to die. You could die in 2 seconds. I could die in 2 seconds. I've actually thought about that. If I died while doing a live broadcast, that'd be really weird. It'd be really weird. It'd just be really weird. So don't deny it. Don't delay it. You can find more information about me in the description below. I am early. I normally do my live stream Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. Central Time. I'm doing it much earlier today. I've turned the volume up on the mic. We had bad internets, but I think we're going well. So I'm early. We got T-ball. I'm doing this because we're on all platforms. I will post this to Rumble. I will post this to Brighteon. I will post this to Do I have a BitChute account? I think I have a BitChute account. We will do that. Today we're going to be talking about the Precinct Strategy. This is going to be a more political, in the weeds broadcast. Normally I like to apply the biblical worldview, or a biblical worldview. I like to bring the Bible into all things. I'm hearing a lot of different people starting to ask the question, well, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do politically? Jarrin, we live in a country that things don't make sense, and Joe Biden's opening up the borders and all these other things. What do we do politically? And so this is going to be one of those live streams dedicated specifically to answering that question and to give specific things. I'm going to address a very specific idea. The heads up is community standards. I'm going to be advancing and advocating that you weaponize community standards in a legal sense in order to browbeat not only conservative race theory or critical race theory, critical race theory, but to browbeat back all the other godlessness that you don't like, whether that's the sexual immorality of the LGBTQJJJC, whatever it is, there is a legal pathway to do this. Now, I hear it. The skeptics are going to say, well, it's the courts and, what can we trust? Okay, yeah, I get you. I get you, but I'm not about to start shooting people in the face, so I'm going to use the system that we have, and I'm going to outline for you today what I think is a very specific, very powerful, influential, constitutional, moral, ethical, biblical approach to push back on that. But before I do that, in phase 1, I'm going to be analyzing the precinct strategy. And the idea there is that people need to get involved at their local level politically. They need to become precinct captains. We're going to be talking about this in phase 1 more in depth. But the idea, British, is that if people do this, that they'll somehow be able to take over the Republican Party. And if we take over the Republican Party, then we can have political outcomes and we can assert our political will. And so if we're going to speak about political will, I want to participate. I want to be part of the thing, but I also want to kind of pour some cold water on what I think the shortcoming is of the precinct strategy. So we'll do that, but before that, we're going to do a update. So let's roll the rock and let's go. All right, my levels of volume levels are changed because when the internet was bad 2 days ago, I had to turn everything off. When you turn everything off, you lose all your settings. When you lose all your settings, you forget which settings you've changed in order to optimize the experience. And so whenever you change the settings that you've changed to optimize the experience, you don't know how loud things are, all sorts of stuff. So that's why the mic has been bad. I hope that makes sense. For those of you who don't care, watch this video.
This is the truth that we're living in. And Christ represents the truth, the light. We're going back to the light right now. And right now, darkness is walking the earth. And that is part of the darkness. It's an evil agenda to shut people's consciousness down and to enslave them. It's nothing else.
Well, we'll have to agree to disagree on that. But
Yeah.
we can still serve together.
What do you disagree about that?
Oh, we just, we're asked to wear masks, and we
By who?
by our, our profit. And
For what?
to help just keep everyone safe. Because
Safe from what?
COVID,
What is COVID? What kind of disease?
virus.
Similar to the cold or the influenza? How deadly is it? How deadly is it?
I don't want to argue, sir.
There's no argument. I'm asking an intelligent person, are you educated? Are you a human? You have a responsibility to use the intelligence God gave you.
Preach.
And you're not thinking right now. You're following orders. You're not thinking for yourself. You're not in touch with your soul. Because if you were, you would take that bullshit off. And you would breathe freely, which is the #1 form of nutrition. And if you don't have proper oxygen, you can't have cognitive function. And if you can't think right, you're easily pushed around.
Yeah, my bad. I had watched that a lot of times and I forgot to bleep out the BS, so I apologize. Please forgive me. I try not to do that, but sometimes I just forget, and that's one of those things. What I loved about what he's saying, besides the glorious beard, did he remind you of Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump when he's just running around? I just wanted to go running. Not the pedophile, Luciferian, child trafficking Tom Hanks, but like the Forrest Gump Tom Hanks. And how they're... he's just had a glorious beard, not a quantum beard, but a glorious beard. But he's saying, you have a responsibility to use your intelligence. That's a good thing. And I need to learn from that. I think that's a powerful demonstration of, accepting or advancing a biblical worldview. If God gives you stuff, then you have got the responsibility to use those things, and you're going to be accountable for how you use them. I have the ability to think, so I am responsible. I have responsibility for how I use my intelligence. If God's going to give me intelligence, He has a lot of it, by the way. I have a quantum PhD in stuffology from Harvard. But if I have intelligence and God's given it to me, then I have a responsibility for that. So that's good. I'm going to take that because That's a great, great thing. Do you not understand how whenever those two worldviews collide, he's advancing a premise? Jesus Christ is the light, and the light is coming back against the darkness, and the darkness does not understand it. That's John chapter 1, verse 5. The darkness does not understand the light. Those people, the sheeple, the folks that are, mind-controlled zombie slaves, the people wearing the masks, obeying the dictates from on high, they didn't know what to say. They were just like, well, we just don't want to argue. Well, one, they don't want to argue. What they want is tyrannical government control to shut down businesses and do all those things. But you get them in a conversation and they don't have anything. They have no answer. No answer. And my friends, that is the response to truth. When you advance the truth, people don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. It's truth. And the truth will set you free. John chapter 8. Did a Bible study today, by the way. That's up on Telegram. It's up on Rumble and all the other platforms that I'm on. Doing a lot of recording. Doing a lot of catch-up, as it were. So that is, I like that. I played that as part of the update, as a demonstration of how truth engages the godless commie perspective. Here is a newscast, this is from last week, on how the godless commies are incentivizing people putting things into their bodies. Watch this. Understand what the godless commies believe people's organizing principle is around, and we'll speak about this in phase 2. Watch this.
Get your vaccine. Get your shot today, and you can get free dances from a local strip club.
Today, you can tell your loved one, hey, honey, I'm going to the strip club, and she might not divorce you. And here's why. From 4 to 7, you can come here and get your COVID shot, and then all kinds of other perks. All kinds of other perks. So here I am. I'm right outside Larry Flint's Hustler Club. Again, from 4 to 7, you can come out here and either get the Pfizer shot or the Johnson & Johnson shot. You must be 21 or older, and you must not have received any other vaccine at this point. So again, it's either the Pfizer or the Johnson & Johnson shot from 4 to 7 today. And then at 7:30, I'm told the entertainment begins. I'm not entirely sure what that means. I've never ventured inside these kinds of places before, but I think I can figure out what it means. But once you come here and get your shot, man, listen to this perk package. You get a Platinum Club membership, free bottle, limo rides, tickets to another sexy show that they're touting. It's like a package worth $5,000. And again, the main reason is they're trying to encourage people to get their vaccine shot, you guys. Like if I was the marketing director for this event, this is what I would have come up with. Jab for a jiggle.
Yeah, we like that.
We like it.
This is going to be the thing that gets them over the hump.
Hey, if this is what it takes to get your vaccine, come on out to Larry Flint's place.
Right, so they're organizing along sex and sexual immorality. Pricks for pedophiles is probably what I would have called it. Understanding that people are trying to be motivated by sexual indulgence and sexual promiscuity and lewdness, lasciviousness, all sorts of different words that the Bible uses. What I hate about this is that it definitely shows that this is the level of communicating sexuality that our public is used to, that it's grown accustomed to. And I will get into this here in topic 2, in phase 2, but put a pin in that right there. Put a pin in the fact that the government, or at least some people advancing the daisies, are starting to communicate to people that they can go ahead and get their thing and, benefit from a lap dance. It's like, hey, what's up? A couple different things. They said that this is a $5,000 perk package. It's a sure. I can't say that. That is right there. You saw discretion in real time. I can't say what I said because that is Army Jarrin coming back, and we can't say those things on the Jarrin Jackson live stream. Just understand that the organizing principle here is sexual promiscuity in order to get medical compliance. Almost as though if people wanted people to obey what they say, not to be rhyming, but if people wanted obedience and compliance, if you advance or offer them sexual opportunity, you get your political control. You get your political outcome. I wonder if there are other areas of society where, because the floodgates of sexual promiscuity and immorality have been unleashed, people have been able to attain or achieve political control. Jarrin, you be talking legit. You're gonna be, you're gonna be censored and silenced. Yeah, probably, because I say Jesus Christ is King and the only way to go to heaven. Next up is I saw this 2 nights ago. Listen to what this, mainstream media public figure has said. Listen to what she's talking about.
Far-left Rockefeller Foundation helped produce a shockingly prescient report on 4 possible future scenarios that could play out over the next 15 to 20 years. One of them involved a global pandemic that's remarkably similar to what happened over the last year. During this pandemic, quote, international mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt. Normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. National leaders around the world imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temp checks.
So, Lockstep, Rockefeller Foundation, published 2010, very accurately predicted the fact that they would have to shut down the economies and use masks, and a global pandemic would be the impetus, the stimulant, the reason, the cause, the motivation, the fuel. The reason why people do the stuff that they do is because they were sufficiently poked and prodded and urged to do such. That their fear of death, being inspired and instigated by a mass mockingbird, godless commie media, would arouse into them this collective and sporadic fear. That if everyone were face to face with death and the prospect of a virus that only kills 99.99999999997% of the people, but if people were absolutely face to face with this, oh no, I will do whatever you want. You want me to put a mask on? I'll put a mask on. You want me to shut down my business? I will shut down all the businesses in order so that I don't die. Not to mention the fact that I absolutely will die because mortality rate is 100% thanks to Adam and Eve for eating the fruit and giving us a fallen creation. But the fact that there is sin and you're going to die, you can't speak to that. But the godless commies hang that over your head. I did a live stream in the first part of 2020. It didn't pick up because I was trying to be someone I wasn't. But I called it inevitable. And I called it inevitable, and it was banned on my first YouTube channel, so you can't find it anymore. But inevitable was speaking to the fact that because you're going to die, it's inevitable. So why am I going to behave or act as though I'm not going to die? The subtext of COVID is the fear of death. And so if you eliminate the fear of death, which is, boom, right there, the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus Christ, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, Jesus took care of death. Death, whereas your sting, 1 Corinthians 15, there's no more power here anymore. But the world has organized around the fear of death to achieve political outcome. Part of that fear of death that they advance, or in tandem, is sexual indulgence. You are able to get your orgasm anywhere you want in all sorts of these different varieties. Here's your buffet table of potential orgasm. And because we're organizing around this concept of these this fizzing of the enzymes and the hormones, and we're optimizing your opportunities to experience these physical pleasures just bubbling up in your brain. How do you get the dopamine? Well, you have social media designed to give you likes and clicks and shares, and it rewards your brain for achieving or accomplishing things. And so a digital world that's organized truth around getting dopamine hits and becoming addicted to the things, enslaved to these phones. By doing this, they're able to control. And so it's no different that whenever they start to say, hey, you guys are going to die from this 99.99997% virus that everyone doesn't die from, but you're going to die from it. And so you have to take this daisy in order to comply. That's how they do it. And I thought it was interesting how Laura Ingraham brought that up a couple days ago on her station, on her channel on Fox News, where she's talking about the fact that Lockstep was a Rockefeller Foundation. These godless commie globalists are communicating something very specific. And at what point do Americans start to believe the people who hate them? At what point do we believe that whenever our enemy says he wants to kill a bunch of people, we say, yeah, maybe they just want to kill a bunch of people? It's like Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister for Great Britain at the very beginning of World War II. He met Hitler in France. Enchanté, bon chéri, I drink the wine and smell of the cheese. He signed a treaty with Hitler after Hitler had invaded after Hitler had invaded, signs this treaty. He's like, oh man, he's a good dude. He's a good guy. Hitler, man, he's my homie. He's a homie. We had tea and crumpets. He gave me some Vienna sausage. I gave him some chips and, what's it called? Fish and chips. I'm not British, so I don't know. I gave him some fish and chips. He told me how to cut my mustache and gave me some Vienna sausage. Hey, got some Belgian beer. Hey, Bob's your uncle. We're homies. Let's sign this thing. And then Hitler, like, started launching rockets at him. He's like, ah, crap. It's like revisionist history with Jarrin. So, Neville Chamberlain, some god, a godless commie before Jarrin Jackson was alive to call it a godless commie, a globalist, a pacifist, someone who was like, oh, this guy that wrote this book called Mein Kampf that hates the Jews, I totally don't believe whenever he said 10 years ago that he wanted to kill all the Jews. I totally don't believe him. I think he's had to come to a Moloch meeting where he's completely changed his outlook on things. He just wants to have a great ethno-state. He doesn't want to wage war with us. So anyway, Neville Chamberlain was completely wrong, and that's where these people are too. Would never, Rockefeller pushed this out. He's a godless commie. He's a globalist. When he's pushed this out, this plan, he calls it lockstep. Well, what do you think of whenever you think lockstep? I think of military people marching on time. Left, 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 right or left. I don't know what I've been told. The godless commies are very old. And it won't be long till I'm marching to their death camps. And why do I say that? Well, because Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, his father said this in 2012.
The no-growth people. But I'd add as a corollary to that, you have to get population under control as well. Because if you look at it in sheer economic terms, how can you sustain increases in per capita income at a time when you have rising population without rising economic growth? Whereas if you have a declining population, which is what I would aim for, then of course even a stable economic growth situation will give you increases in per capita income. So that's where I stand on that.
Do you have a sense of what the carrying capacity of Britain is, or of the world as a whole? Or?
Well, Britain, I put it at 10 or 15 million. I think that'd be absolutely fine. I mean, that would do us really splendidly. At a limit, 2025, I think it's complete nonsense that we are now confronted with an island, would you believe it, of 70 million people. I wrote a paper, I think it's the only paper the Conservative Party has ever published, and it was published as an old Queen Street paper in June 1972, oddly enough. And it was called Britain Needs a Population Policy. And
you could still argue that today, I mean, right now?
I certainly could. But what has happened, of course, is that we have all been, as it were, shunted off course by what you might call the rise of political correctness. Because you can't talk about this now without saying you're anti-feminist, because you're telling women what to do with their bodies, or you're racist, because you're saying it's the browns and the blacks and the yellow races who mustn't have, or you're left-winger, because you're trying to get at the capitalist society. So it's a very, very difficult one now. And I would say that at the very least, the governments of the world have to start talking. The government of this country has to start talking seriously about immigration. Because if you look at the rise in Britain's population now, you will see that, as it were, there is a really serious differential in the fertility of the immigrant population to the fertility of what you might call the indigenous population. So anyway, but this is very political stuff, not one for Guardian readers.
Interesting. That is the father of the current British Prime Minister talking about having a population platform. So to clarify, Jarrin has a population platform. Jarrin's population platform is make babies. Left, right, make babies. Husbands, you're welcome. Wives, hey, Bible says to be, multiply. That is Jarrin's official position on families. Make them, grow them, tend them, keep them, protect them, teach them, love them, provide for them, protect them. Don't depopulate them. That is my official position on families. I am pro-family. I am pro-marriage. I am pro-kids. I'm pro-baby making the way that God designed it. Amen. Amen. So I would encourage people to make and grow as big of families as they possibly can and teach them to love Jesus and all these other things. But why are people advancing this notion of population control? Do you understand the assumptions that they have baked in? He was talking about sustainability. He's talking about per capita income. You notice now how these people apply arbitrary indexes, standards that they come up with, that they don't see that the standard is, kids teach discipline to their parents because they teach prioritization, discipline. They hone the focus of their parents. Parents are actually more productive because now they have to take care of little people made in God's image, and they've got to provide for a family. So it's like the adult, the dad, actually becomes a better, more productive person, generally speaking, unless you have a society organized around giving that father sexual promiscuity, indulgence, and pornography at his moment's touch, because a society that does that to the father is robbing the family of the father's influence. So if you have that as a society, you're going to have a deleterious effect, which the root word there is delete, which means, take out of, remove. But if you have kids, you generally are more productive. It hones the thinking and improves the constitution. It forces you to rely on other people, namely God, because you recognize you are not in control. And the first time that I realized that my life is not my own, after I raised my hand and I swore the oath of the Constitution the first time, I learned that I was not my own person whenever I held my son in my hands. And I was like, oh no, this is a big deal. And it changed your life for the better, obviously. But have big families, and the fact that I bring this up in a update, because if the guy with the beard is talking about you need to be able to breathe in order to have cognition to think, and you have a responsibility for your intelligence. If the news people then come up and say we're going to elicit stripper poles and lap dances and a $5,000 perk prick package at the Hustler Larry Flint or David Flint, whatever his name is, Hustler place, we're going to incentivize men to come get the jab, as it were. You got to think, why are we organizing medical incentives and compelled behavior along, sex and lewdness and flesh? Why are we using flesh to tempt people to make medical decisions? Laura Ingraham talks about the Rockefeller lockstep plan. Stanley, Johnson, the father of the Prime Minister of Britain, is talking about depopulation. How does all this stuff tie together? Well, that's the world we live in. We live in the world of the Great Reset. Here is my book, received in the mail a couple days ago. It was underneath a bunch of stuff. The Great Reset, COVID-19, The Great Reset, by Klaus Schwab and Thierry Malloret. Now that's probably Terry Malloret, but I'm an American, so that's Thierry Malloret. Thierry Malloret. That's who that's by. So those are Godless Comedy Luciferians. I have the book. I'm going to read it. I'm going to do some analysis. I might even do some specific videos targeted directly to that, like an expose type of thing. Maybe. We'll see. Maybe I might start doing book reports. Not live, but just like a recorded video. So I'll do a Bible study, and then I'll do book reports, because I think people need to have book reports. So Jarrin will go back to middle school and high school and start doing book reports for people. Which means I have to start reading books that aren't the Bible. Ugh. Okay, so why do I bring all this up? Because Rasmussen reports, and look at this numbers. This is from June 6-7, so this is just 2 days ago. Look down here at the bottom. Should the Republican Party be more like former President Donald Trump or more like Mike Pence? More like Donald Trump, 64%. More like Mike Pence, 24%. The conservatives, 62 to 27. What's the takeaway here? The takeaway here is that Republican Party wants to be like Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the Republican Party. That is the future. That is the direction. The grassroots have spoken. That is where we're going to go. Now, why is that important? Why is it important that more conservatives, more Republicans, more patriots want to be like Donald Trump? Well, maybe this is why. Also from Rasmussen. How likely is it that COVID-19 virus originated in a Chinese laboratory? Look at this. 1,000 national voters. This is voters. All voters. 68%. 68% of all voters. This is Rasmussen. This is from 8 hours ago. Right? Look at that. 8. Do I have it down the bottom? 8 hours ago. Down at the bottom right. So this is June 9th. 8 hours ago. I clipped this an hour ago. So this is 9 hours ago now. Morning of June 9th. Rasmussen says 68% of all voters believe that it is likely. How likely? Very likely plus somewhat likely. 68% of Americans American voters now believe that it comes from Chinese laboratory. Why is that important? Why is it important that people want to be like Donald J. Trump? The truth is getting out. That's the issue. The issue is that the Mockingbird media, they may have the platforms, they may have all the things that control the distribution of the information, but if you can find me in the links below, Telegram, Brighteon, BitChute, Rumble, all these alternative platforms, I might not be able to live stream on the places where there are the most people, but those polls right there are definitely indicating that the majority of voters are starting to understand how things aren't the way that they've been told. Now, when does that actually when does it actually break? When does it actually start to, result in political change? I don't know. But that is the end of my report, and it is the transition into phase 1 where I start to address someone who's talking about that issue. Roll the rock. There is a man, his name is Dan Schultz. Dan Schultz. This is the Precinct Strategy. The website's up there to the left, precinctstrategy.com, precinctstrategy.com. He has been on Steve Bannon's War Room. He has been on The Professor's Record, who is a guy out of New Mexico, endorsed by Lynn Wood. I believe The Professor's Record. All smart people. I want to say that right up front. I believe what these people are talking about, and I'll leave that there for 2-3 more seconds. I believe that all these people are trying to address the critical issues of the day, and that is, I will say, the way that Jarrin summarizes this, from a political perspective, the American people's will has no consent. The Declaration of Independence talks about the consent of the governed is what gives government its just power. If government doesn't have the consent of the governed, then government is governing without the people's consent. The people don't consent to what the government is doing. What's the people's recourse? The Declaration will talk about to abolish it, to change it, amend it. But what does that mean in real life 21st century American terms? And that's what I want to address today. But before I get to that in phase 2, I want to address what Dan Schultz has said in phase 1. Phase 1 is about the Precinct Strategy. The Precinct Strategy is recognizing that at a political organization perspective, so looking at the geography of America through a political lens, you've got levels of government and levels of organizing around certain ideas. So let's take Oklahoma. I am in Oklahoma. I live in Oklahoma. I live in Rogers County. And then I live in a certain precinct, I'm not going to tell you which one, in Rogers County. If you think about that, you have Jarrin as an American, then Jarrin is an Oklahoman, then Jarrin is living in Rogers County, then Jarrin is at XYZ precinct in Rogers County. The precinct strategy is to put the focus at the local level. And for that reason, I really like this, because it acknowledges the fact that people are so focused at the upper echelons, at the national level, that it's very easy to lose sway. It's very easy to lose, what's the word? Motivation. It's really easy to lose support by taking people's attention and holding it up here, because if you win the national election, whew, all right, and everything down below, the thinking goes, the assumption of the thinking goes, that if I win the president, everything below the president is good to go. That's the assumption of the common man's perspective. That the common American, that if whoever's president, well, that's like our king, right? That seems to be the trend where we're going, and I don't think that that's necessarily wrong. In the sense that I don't think that that is a wrong assessment. I think it's a wrong conclusion, because I'm an American. I'm not going to bend the knee to any king, except for Philippians chapter 2, Lord Jesus Christ. Every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. This side of eternity or that side. Please be this side. Believe the gospel of Jesus Christ. Do not die in your sins. Conscious eternal torment in a lake of fire forever. Don't do that. So you will not bend the knee to a king. But the thinking is that the civic understanding of the basic average American is so horrible and dismal, so anathema to what the founding fathers actually thought, that you would have people functionally think the president is a king. And if you are that person, then you are wrong. But the assumption and the precinct strategy is that most people have considered the president to be like the tone setter. They just snap a finger, scrawl on a piece of paper to change things. I mean, Joe Biden on day one signed an executive order that undid the Keystone XL pipeline. How does he have that authority? I don't know. He signed a piece of paper, and so from that piece of paper, he destroyed so many jobs. America's dependency, our exporting of oil. He made us an oil importer just like that. Just a stroke of a pen, changed national policy, undermined national security, blah, 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 blah. So the precinct strategy is organizing around the principle of locality. Understand that your local government is the source of your power. That if you, like Nehemiah 4, and I've said this before, Nehemiah 4, build the wall in front of your house. Don't worry to your neighbor to the left. Don't worry about the neighbor to the right. Build the wall in front of your house. The precinct strategy is based on that concept. And from that, I agree with it. I like that principle. I agree with that principle. I've advanced that principle in what I call is live local. But we'll get there in phase 2. But the precinct strategy basically says that if you think about all the little bitty precincts that make up all the counties, if you are going to take over the Republican Party, and that's what he says, he goes, we have a two-party system. And I don't want to, I mean, if you can go to his website and you can find him on the internet and all the interviews that he's doing a lot. And I would encourage you to listen to him. So I'm not selling him short, or I'm not kind of mischaracterize or besmirch him in any way. That's not my intent at all. I generally agree with what he's saying. I disagree with the application of it because I think he has one glaring vulnerability that he does not address. I'll get to that in phase 2. But what he's saying is that people need to organize at the precinct level, and that the Republican Party has over 200,000 vacancies at the precinct level. His assumption, one of them, is that if you fill these precinct captains or these precinct chairmen with America First patriots, Trump supporters, constitutional defenders, Christians, if you fill them, then you will actually exercise more clout in the Republican Party. And if you can exercise more clout in the Republican Party, then you can actually change who's at the top of the RNC. The thinking goes that if you change who's at the top of the RNC, you change how all this money is distributed, the influence in the party, what candidates get elected, what candidates get nominated, all those other kind of things. I do not doubt that that is true. I doubt that that is what will happen. And the reason why is because, and I'm kind of stealing from 2010 here, the Tea Party movement. I was in the Army, so I don't really remember it. I remember hearing about it, but I was in the Army. I was in Afghanistan in 2010, so I didn't participate politically. Where I look at the precinct strategy and what's going on is, and this is kind of my analysis, I don't like it because what it does, it robs people of their integration into society. It reduces our current it reduces the status quo and directs it to a political solution. I do not believe a political solution is going to be effective for the status quo. I think our culture is so godless. I think our culture is so anti-American. I think our culture is so F you to God that filling all the vacancies of the GOP down to the precinct level with the most American First patriots, Trump supporters, people in the world does not sufficiently address the issue. The issue is not the Republican Party isn't effective or doesn't have a good message. The issue is with a undermined vote and a system of fraud that undermines the greatest of candidates, Donald J. Trump. It doesn't matter whether you've got the precinct captains or the committee members or not. What you have is a electoral system, an institution that has been so thoroughly corrupted, whether that's paid off politicians from China or voting machines that can be hacked remotely. Whatever it is, the system has been undermined. And so to try to solve the system within the system is to almost accept the premise that the system is what is good or what you should be using. Now, I want to be very clear, and maybe I'm not able to do this. I want to thread a needle here. We have our political system that we have. We have a two-party system, and I don't like it. And I am a Republican because I'm a conservative. What do you conserve? I conserve God's order, according to the Bible. So because I'm a Christian, I'm a Christian, I believe the Bible. Because I believe the Bible is God's word, I want to conserve and obey it. Because I want to conserve and obey it, I defend the Constitution. The Constitution is built on biblical principle. How do I know that? You get the entire Constitution, the idea of federalism, in one verse. Isaiah 33:22. Isaiah 33:22 says, "For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king." You have the judicial, the legislative, and the executive branch right there in one verse. The founding fathers looked to Isaiah 33:22 and had the inspiration for dividing up and framing the government the way that we have. So I see the Bible all throughout the Constitution. The evidence is clear. That's also the worldview of the men that gave us the Constitution. The challenge is we do not live in that world. We do not have that culture. We live in that world, but we don't have that culture. We don't have leaders with that thinking. And so if you actually adopt the precinct strategy and you fill it with the greatest, most bestest America First patriots in the entire world, what do you get? You're not guaranteed to have the outcome that you want. You're not guaranteed to have the political outcome. And so I think it's actually a misdirection. I think it's actually a red herring, because what it does, it advances the premise that the Republican Party is the path to salvation, is the institution that we need to use in order to accomplish goodness, in order to restore justice or freedom or defend our rights or whatever it is. Whatever the political problem that you define is, the precinct strategy assumes the premise of the Republican Party's success via America First patriots occupying the precinct level, this grassroots bubbling up, the grumbling of free people trying to impose their consent onto their politicians or the political system to accomplish very specific political outcomes, accomplish accountability, all these kinds of things. That assumes that if you have a good political system, you're going to have a good culture, a good society. And I think it's actually the inverse. I think it's actually the opposite. I think that politics is downstream from culture. And so if you have everyone's focus on, I got to be a committeeman, I got to be a committeeman, and don't let me besmirch or diminish what Mr. Schultz is doing. I'm not trying to insult him. I'm trying to say that his solution misses the mark and it's insufficient. Because it misses the mark, it will be insufficient and will always be a failure. Not that it's a bad idea and not that it's not necessary, but that if it's the only thing, that if it is the priority, it will always miss the mark because it's not aiming to accomplish what, it's not aiming to solve what the real issue is. Which begs the question, well, Jarrin, if you're so smart, what is the real issue? I'm glad you asked. Roll the rock. Let's get to phase 2. The real issue in our culture, the real issue in our world is sin. The real issue in America, specifically politics and our culture, is godlessness. That's the issue. That is the issue. Now, some people are just like, oh, he goes preaching again. Okay, let me try to apply the specifics of the gospel through the political process in order to address what's going on culturally. Now, you may have just thought you heard me say you can't do anything politically in order to accomplish a cultural outcome, but that's not what I said. I said if your focus is on political solutions, you will never address the cultural problems. If, however, your political solutions are nested inside of a solution that not only addresses politics, but culture and economics and trade and, philosophy and theology and all these other things, you can have a message that is powerful enough to solve all these problems, or at least to address them, to push the football down the field and go on offense. I want to go on offense. So until Jesus comes back and he's in charge, he has given me and you, if you're a Christian, the authority to advance his kingdom by preaching the gospel. So what does that look like culturally? What does that look like politically? This is what phase 2 is all about. In order to frame this, I want to play 2 clips. These 2 clips are going to show you, the purpose of me playing these clips is to show you the fecklessness, the futility of pursuing a precinct strategy only. So if you get all the best people, let's just assume precinct strategy is done, Schultz's strategy is good, and the Republican Party is the most America First, free market capitalism constitutional defending party in the history of the world. It is like the best, most rock solidest, America First, patriot, pro-Trump, America, like explosions and eagles and flags flying all over the place. So many people are driving around with their boats and Trump flags and their trucks and American flags, and like people are like walking in the superstores with both their machine guns going, yeah, America. Let's say that is the outcome. Okay, let's just grant that. If that's the outcome, you still fail. You still fail because of these two clips. I'm going to show you that the culture has become so unmoored from our foundational values that to participate in the system as the system was designed to try to restore the system is to accept failure. That's my point. Watch these first clips. This first clip, well, I'll just watch.
Figure out how to get every American a place at the table in this democracy, but how to separate Americanness, America, from whiteness. Until we can confront that and talk about that, this is really going to continue. I was on Long Island this weekend visiting a really dear friend, and I was really disturbed. I saw, dozens and dozens of pickup trucks with, explicatives against Joe Biden on the back of them, Trump flags, and in some cases just dozens of American flags, which is also just disturbing because...
Yeah, so disturbing. So disturbing, those racists. so many racists that are disturbing flying Old Glory. This is getting a lot of traction, and the tribal media, when I say tribal media, the left versus right, the Democrats suck and they want socialism, and then the Democrats are over here going, everybody's a racist unless they, accept my sexual indulgence. That type of thing. Like that paradigm, I think is antiquated. I think it's old. I think it's anti-American. I think it's going to continue to ravage our culture. I think it's going to rend our society apart. And there's no forgiveness there. There's no humility there. There's no grace. There's no love in that dichotomy. That rivalrous dichotomy, and I'm very susceptible to it. I'm a Trump supporter. I want to defend the Constitution. I think that all the godless commies are godless commies. I want to see them dangle, but that does not mean that I don't want grace, forgiveness, love, humility, patience, peace, kindness, joy instead. It just means that it's easier to go against the peace, patience, love, joy, kindness, humility, forgiveness. Like, that's hard. But let's rise to the challenge and let's go to war the right way. Going to the war the right way recognizes that the godless commies hate this country. The godless commies are trying to characterize this country as whiteness. To be a patriot, to be a constitutional supporter, to be someone who flies the flag on the back of your truck is to be someone who is immoral and wrong. Like someone who's unethical and evil. That's really what people are trying to characterize it as. And that's where a good chunk of the culture is. So how, going back to the precinct strategy, do I get all the precinct strategies, all the precincts filled with the most America First Republicans? Does the America First Republican Party advance the conservative idea against minds that are that enslaved? Her mind is so enslaved that she has concluded that America is the most evil of places, and that if anyone advances an idea of America that's contradictory to her, that's actually historical and constitutional, she disagrees with. Her mind is so enslaved and so far off history and truth and observable fact that she concludes things that are contradictory to truth. She's basking, she's marinating in deception. She doesn't know it. And because she doesn't know it, I acknowledge and I submit to you, you can have the most America First Republican Party ever, and you're still engaging those people. Now, what if you do the precinct strategy, you fill all the precinct holes, you get all the America First Republicans, you overturn the Republican Party, you get it to be Trump, you get it to be America First, you get it to be constitutional defended, and you beat those guys. You beat those guys politically. They still exist. They still exist. And this is why I submit to you that it's a losing proposition to focus on the precinct strategy without a unified, more robust approach that addresses the culture, addresses society, addresses economics, addresses our politics, addresses our process, and gives motivation that's more organic, that's more eternal, something that's actually sustainable, rather than we got to beat these guys in the next election. Because let's be blunt. If you do the precinct strategy, you're going to fill it with a bunch of people who have time on their hands and are politically focused. Who is that? That's the boomers. That's people that are in the older generation. Retirees, People who are looking back on their country going, holy crap, this stuff sucks. How do we get engaged? How do we do stuff? That's going to be older generations. Well, what happens to older generations? They die. So you're going to have a bunch of precincts filled by a bunch of America First patriots who are good, decent, God-fearing people, Trump supporters, constitutional defenders. They want the best for the country. And they're going to be the precinct leaders, and they might win an election or two. And then they die. So are we to assume that they're just going to be naturally filled by the same caliber of patriot? Are we just going to assume that the America First political movement continues? What is our sustainable strategy for making sure that we pass the torch of liberty down to the next generation? Should we just assume that people will always naturally value freedom? Does it seem like that mind naturally values freedom? Let's go a bit younger. That woman that was talking about the Trump flags and the American flags on the back of trucks being disturbing, she was around my age, so she was a millennial, maybe a little bit older. Let's go younger. Let's see if the younger generation just naturally has this affinity for freedom that we want to hope everyone does. Watch this.
But my patience has run out. Pansexuality is not inherently biphobic. They are both valid sexualities. Both of them. And while yes, I have seen pansexual people use that label for questionable reasons, they pretty quickly get it once you explain things to them. They do. And not only that, but do you know who likes to use specific or micro labels? Neurodivergent people. Sometimes we just have to do whatever we can to feel safe and comfortable. And using a more specific label can be our outlet for that. If you took all that energy you spend calling people biphobic and saying they're performing bi erasure and just educated them, there would be less biphobia. There would be less bi erasure. Because you've explained it, and people will know the difference. I have fucking had it with you guys. Jesus fuck.
Okay, I tried to blur out some of the words, and you could still tell what she says, and I apologize for that, little kids, and, you know, whatever. But the idea is that she's young, she's of the new generation, the upcoming generations. Does it sound like she has an element of freedom, a respect for the country? Do you think that you can talk to her about George Washington crossing the Delaware River on Christmas Eve? Do you think that she has a mind for that? She's got neurodivergent labels and micro labels, and I learned stuff. I was like, bi erasure, like you're erasing bi. It's just like mind blown. How do you relate to those people? Now you take that, and you stack up the precinct strategy with it. How does the precinct strategy talk to that? Well, Jarrin, you're being unfair. Schultz isn't trying to address that issue. Bingo. That's my point. That's exactly my point. My point is that the precinct strategy has no solution for that. It's not even aiming at that. Completely just was like, oh, we don't know what to do about that. So what do we do with a body politic that is used to free market capitalism and defend the Constitution, and I love my flag? How do we... And those are my people. I love those people. Those are my people. I am those people. But how do we take those people and stack them up against that? Well, there will be some people that you just got to beat them at the ballot box. Amen. True. Amen. Absolutely we do. But they've got control of all the institutions. They've got control of the media. They got control of the schools. They write the textbooks. They are the ones that are allowing information to be distributed. They can literally shut off ideas by deplatforming and censoring people. So how do you push back against them? How do you actually engage that? I want to go back a little bit, kind of to phase one, and I want to do a little bit of analysis. I did not do this. I did not show this graphically, but I will. So let me do this. We have here the state of Oklahoma. Right? There's Oklahoma. You've got Rogers County, right? Generally right there. That's generally where I live. Now, Rogers County's got all these precincts, right? All these little precincts in there. So let's take this blow up and take one precinct. The precinct Jarrin lives. So Jarrin lives in this precinct. So Jarrin lives right here. Jarrin, the most America First patriot who defends the Constitution. Let's do this. Jarrin, the most America First patriot who loves the Constitution, is now a precinct captain. And look at that. You can see the reflection of my computer. Look at that. It's weird. I'm here, and I'm a precinct captain. And you fill up all those precincts, and you fill up all the precincts of Oklahoma, right? You fill them all up. They all equally have all the precincts. And then you go all over the United States. So those are all the precincts in Oklahoma, and they're all filled. And then we go to, there's Florida, and, you know, then we fill up all the ones in America, right? We fill up all these. What do we do? So we got all the precincts filled in America. We got all the precincts in Oklahoma, and we filled them all with Jarrin Jacksons. We filled them all with the most, God-fearing, constitutional defending, Rush baby, Lynn Wood endorsed, Mike Lindell endorsed. Not like Mike Lindell's endorsed me, but you know, we are on a Q proof together, by the way. You fill them with the most precincts. How many people are in a precinct? One? If one person was in a precinct strategy would be brilliant. Yeah, fill them all up. But there's like a gazillion people in precincts. So you can get one precinct captain in the Republican Party, but there's like a gazillion people in the precinct. So you could have one person who votes for the right thing, but then if you've got like 15,000, very quickly, those 15,000 overwhelm the one. Part of Schultz's strategy and part of the strength of the precinct strategy is to use these people to overwhelm and to influence the GOP, the party structure. The failure there is that you've got a bunch of internal politics and you've got a bunch of this and that and me against you and bylaws and committees and all sorts of stuff that people are just going to be like, I don't want to do that. And that's actually part of his statement is like, listen, you got to give 3 hours every Saturday once an election cycle in order to have your way. And there's credibility to that. Like telling people this is going to be hard and they actually have to do something is a good message, and I agree with it. I want to come alongside him and say, yes, amen. Keep telling people that stuff sucks and they're going to have to like work hard. It's going to be worth it. They have to fight for it. It's going to be worth it. But this does not address the culture. It doesn't address it. So you can have this. How long can you accomplish 100% occupancy? How long can you do that? Where is the sustainability here? 2022? You can do this for the next election cycle because people are pissed about 2020. 2024? Okay, yeah, maybe. You got DeSantis, you got Trump on the ballot. I don't know who, but you've got some staying power there. 2026? 28? 30? 32? 34, 36, 38, 40, 42. I can go on, folks. I can go on. Where's the sustainability? Right? The godless commies talk about sustainability. The godless commies talk about sustainability to control your life, but I don't believe that sustainability is necessarily a bad idea as long as you're organizing around the right principle. So what's the principle that we organize around? America, Constitution, freedom, liberty, free market capitalism. What's our issue? What's the issue? Is there an issue that you can organize around that is timeless? Yes, there is. Do you want to know what it is? Do you want to know what the issue is that you can organize around? I'll tell you. I'll write it out. Truth. Truth. You organize around the truth. Well, Jarrin, I don't know what that looks like. Well, that's why you watch me. That's why you watch what I have to say. All right, so how do you organize around the truth? How do you have sustainable truth? Today, a judge reinstated a London County, yesterday, a judge orders reinstatement of a teacher who would not use preferred pronouns. Would not use preferred pronouns. Now, this is a culture battle, and if you ever have someone says the culture wars, maybe I need to do a deep dive on that, because I hate that. I hate that. To say culture wars is to accept the premise that there is such thing as a competition between cultures. Well, if you accept competition between cultures, you've kind of acknowledged that all cultures are true, and it just depends on who's the most effective actually becomes what's accepted. Well, I don't agree with that at all. I don't agree that if LGBTQ JJJC is more competitive and better at distributing his message, that because it will then become the culture necessarily means that it's a good thing. It just means that it was able to suffocate out the other culture that happened to be better. Let's say a biblical culture with a biblical frame of reference for sex and marriage and truth and gender and identity. Just because that culture, the biblical culture, is snuffed out and erased by the JJJoC culture, doesn't mean that the JJJoC culture is more truthful or better. It just means that it was more effective. And so culture war is actually speaking to the effectiveness. It's pragmatism. It's who's the most effective at advancing this cultural norm. Well, truth. Truth is most effective. Let me demonstrate. Because you might not understand what I'm meaning, but just understand that this is in Virginia. And I actually had a video of a woman who is, going to war. So maybe I'll play that tomorrow. But anyway, so this case is this. This is a guy named Cross. What's his name? This is the 20th Judicial Circuit of Virginia. Byron Tanner Cross. Byron Tanner Cross. Now, sometimes, I got to say this. Sometimes whenever I come across a court case, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an attorney, but I love argumentation. I love argumentation, and I want to read argumentation because I am a presuppositionalist, and I will look at what the person presupposes as true in order to form their opinion. So when someone communicates a belief, I will, and I've spent a lot of time, and I've practiced at identifying what they presuppose, what they assume to be true in order for them to communicate what they believe. And if you can identify what someone presupposes, then you can really get inside their headspace and really figure out the efficacy of their worldview. You can do what's called an internal critique. It's like in The Matrix when Neo jumps in the other person and makes them all wobble. He jumps in Agent Smith and he blows them up from the inside out. That's what an internal critique is. And if you can jump inside someone else's worldview, you can walk a mile in their shoes, as it were. If you can walk a mile in someone else's shoes and see the world through their perspective, you can usually figure out how to detonate it. And so, for example, whenever I tell you my bias at the very beginning of the broadcast, that is me announcing my presupposition. My presupposition is that the Bible is God's word and it's true. That's what I presuppose. I presuppose the authority of the Bible. And because I do that, that bases everything else that I believe. Now, I could be wrong because my interpretation is wrong, or I could be more mature and listen to other people who are, have walked with God longer, and there's all sorts of other caveats and qualifiers, but at baseline, the Bible is true. And because the Bible is true, that's the foundation upon which I build my worldview. Jesus preached about this in Matthew 7 at the Sermon on the Mount. The wise man builds his house upon the rock. The foolish man builds his house upon the sand. The rock is God's word. If you build your knowledge on anything else, then it sucks and it's going to be destroyed when the storm comes. So I read these court cases from time to time because I want to know how judges presuppose, and I want to know what they assume to be true in order for them to, whenever they write out their judgments, because just by doing that, it gives incredible insights. Let me see if I can walk you through this. I've never done this before. I'm going to try. It might get a little technical, but please know that on the outside of this, it's going to come to a specific offensive legal strategy that you can do anywhere in the United States in order to overthrow and to push back against the godless commies. Okay, fair enough? Here you go. So here is the legal thing. You got Tyson C. Langhofer-esque, Stacey L. Haney-esque, but it's the Byron Tanner Cross versus London County School Board. Let's go to one of the pull quotes here. This is the judge writing. The judge writes this. In his judgment, whether the plaintiff's speech at the school board meeting was protected is determined by applying the standards set forth in Pickering v. Board of Education. What you need to understand is that the judges will judge, they will come to a conclusion according to tests. That the jurisprudence, the way that the law is determined and ruled on and communicated, is according to precedent. This is stare decisis. This is Latin. You have to keep things the same. There needs to be precedent. You can't depart radically from what has been into where things are and maintain the integrity of the institution. So part of the assumption of a legal precedent, of a legal judge or a judicial ruling, is looking back what has been done in the past and using that to govern today and in the future. Well, one of that is to set a standard. They have to identify the standard. This judge appeals to the standards, quote, set forth in Pickering v. Board of Education. That's a ruling from 1968. And that ruling talks about, a citizen speaking on a matter of public concern. That's critical. A citizen speaking on the matter of public concern. That second paragraph, it says, he's clearly a citizen. He's not in his official capacity. He's not at his place of employment. It's non-working hours. It's a forum where public comment was invited. So if that's the case, that is publicly protected speech. That is First Amendment protected speech. Now, at this point, people might be saying, oh, Jarrin, lots of legal words, get to the point. The point that I'm trying to make is that you can use the First Amendment to go on offense against critical race theory, LGBTQ, all the other godlessness that's going on that's perpetuating the godless culture that we have. So the woman that was talking about bi-erasure and all this other kind of stuff with the things coming out of her eyes, she is a product of a system that has communicated certain things to be true. And insofar, her brain believes those things to be true because people that she trusted told her that. And so if we patriots, Christians, constitutional defenders, advance the ideas that I'm about to give, if we advance these specific ideas, we can actually legally, constitutionally, ethically, morally, biblically attack that. We can attack the system that's destroying people's minds outside of getting the right Republicans in office. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go on offense on all fronts. I'm not saying that the precinct strategy is bad. I'm saying it's insufficient because it addresses a narrow issue. That issue is building out the Republican Party to advance conservative candidates. That's good. I agree with it. Go forth and conquer. Move on, carry out with your airborne mission. But we also need to acknowledge that there are other facets, other fronts that we can advance on. I have encouraged live local. We won't get into that field manual pending, by the way, but I want to talk about this legal issue because I think it's hopefully what I'm thinking about is smart and it's effective. Let me continue. So another part that he talks about, the judge comes down to a test. The test that he's talking about here is whenever you balance Pickering, the court must decide when the plaintiff's First Amendment expression outweighs the defendant's interest in restricting the speech. This is the issue. The issue is, does the First Amendment apply? Where does it apply? What are its limitations? And how does the court decide how to rule? And it sets forth this RIDPATH factors. These RIDPATH factors are the standard. It's the test on how to determine whether or not this court is going to rule in the right way or not. Now, I get it. People are going to say, well, Jarrin, the courts are corrupt as well. Sure. But are we ready to shoot people in the face? Because if not, let's make a legal argument, moral argument, biblical argument, constitutional argument that actually gives you the ability to go on offense everywhere that you are. Here's how. Understand that this case is weighing Pickering. Pickering is about First Amendment expression. There is a way that these courts determine who is right and who is wrong, who is to elevate, what speech to be protected and what speech is not protected. This harkens back to another court case, and I don't want to lose you here. Do not let me lose you here. The United States Supreme Court has a long history of studying speech and ruling on speech. One such court case is Roth versus the United States. In Roth versus the United States, the court struggled with identifying and defining obscenity and pornography. Basically, there was a dude that was going around publishing all sorts of porn material, and the court looked at that question. Can this person distribute obscene or pornographic material? Is pornographic material or obscene material constitutionally protected? And Roth versus the United States in 1957, the year my dad was born, basically came back and said no. Pornography and obscene material is not constitutionally protected. In fact, Roth versus the U.S., this is the summary, says that in a 6-3 decision written by Justice William Brennan, the court held that the obscenity was not, quote, within the area of constitutionally protected speech or press. Do not lose that. The decision in 1957 said that the Constitution does not have, or obscenity is not within the area of constitutionally protected speech or press. So if something is obscene, it is not protected by the Constitution. Do you hear me? If something is obscene, it is not protected by the Constitution. It is not free speech. If there is someone who is saying something that is obscene, that is not protected by the Constitution. Do you get where I'm going with this? If there are obscene issues or ideas, they are not protected by the Constitution. There's a couple of the qualifiers, but that's where we're going to go. That's where I'm directing this. Let's get back to Roth. Roth says, the court held, that the First Amendment was not intended, hear this, the First Amendment was not intended to protect every utterance or form of expression. The First Amendment was not intended to protect every utterance or form of expression, such as materials that were utterly without redeeming social importance. Utterly without redeeming social importance. The standard of protected speech is, does it have redeeming social importance? Moreover, if something is utterly without redeeming social importance, that thing that is utterly without redeeming social importance is not constitutionally protected. Specifically, quote, whether to the average person, applying contemporary community standards, we'll get to that here in a second, the dominant theme of the material taken as a whole appeals to prurient interests. Now, if you are a wordsmith, you know that prurient is marked by or arousing an immoderate or unwholesome interest or desire, especially marked by arousing or appealing to sexual desire. So if we go back to this and we say, if the dominant theme of the material as a whole appeals to prurient interest, then anything that basically is communicating that people can have sex with whoever they want to is utterly, utterly without redeeming social importance. Are there places, institutions that receive tax dollars, legislative protections, government focus, that are utterly without redeeming social importance? I wonder if schools, public schools funded by taxpayers, are talking about any idea that would be utterly without redeeming social importance, specifically if the theme of the material is according to a prurient interest, prurient being that of sexual interest. Is there a place in the public with taxpayer funds that has the government overseas that is of a matter of public concern that communicates according to sex that would be obscene? And if that's the case, there's a test to afford. There's a test to apply. And that test is according to community standards. That's right. I had this idea because I recently read an email that I've been blocked out of other social media accounts. Why? According to community standards. Now, that community standards is a term that came out of that decision. That decision in Roth, this decision right here, developed the legal term, the legal idea of community standards. Now, the presupposition is, who determines community standards? Another court case, and I'm sorry to do this to you, but we're building a case here. This is a cumulative case. The cumulative case here is in Miller, California. Miller, California, 73 is the current standard that all courts use to this day to determine whether something is or is not obscene or according to community standard. So this case, Miller v. California, 1973, advanced a specific set of criteria. That specific set of criteria was specifically whether the average person applying a contemporary community standard would find that the work taken as a whole appeals to the prurient interest. We've covered that. Number two, whether the work depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law, and whether the work, this is the third, taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. The three parts of the test soon became known in short as the prurient interest, patently offensive, or the slaps prongs. What's my point here? Let me bring all this thing together. We have a sexually indulgent culture. I spoke earlier how sexual indulgence and fornication is actually a form of political control. Getting back to the hustler incentive for the daisy. If people are speaking about sexual interests or sexual immorality in order to get compliance, critical race theory, the JJJC crowd. I'm a bigender. I'm trans this. I'm bi eraser. Like, I don't understand this stuff because I believe the Bible. So I don't understand a depraved mind. I don't have a depraved mind. But depraved minds are communicating sexual liberation. Sexual liberation, I argue, are against community standards because they have no literary, artistic, or social importance. And if they have no importance or social value, if they're utterly without redeeming social value, they fail all the Supreme Court tests laid out in Miller v. California. So if there were any enterprising constitutional attorneys, why don't you sue these schools based on those lines? Because the standard that was set out in Roth, the standard that has been upheld in Miller, California, the standard that judge today, or excuse me, yesterday, the standard that this judge today, this judge went to, was basically saying that free speech is protected whenever it has an interest that is a matter of public concern. And if it's done in a way that's not disrupting things. Now, this judge went further in this, not this one, but this judge went further in this document to say that the defendants, the school board, sued this guy and fired this guy because he said he would not say someone's, preferred pronouns. He said specifically, I'm not going to call a boy a girl. I'm not going to call a biological male a girl. That's the issue here. And the school board fired him. They fired him because the school board reasoned that he was disrupting the institution, which begs the question. This is my whole point here. My whole point is, what is the purpose of these institutions? Are the purpose of public schools to teach children about sex and fornication and sexual liberation and all this other stupid crap that's not in the Bible, the JJJC crowd? No. And I argue that is easy to be determined and easy to reason and easy to conclude according to the standards and the tests that the SCOTUS has already laid out multiple times in the past. So, does this mean that you'll completely throw out the critical race theory and you'll completely throw out the LGBTQ, JJJC crowd and all this other kind of stuff? No, it absolutely doesn't. But what I've given you, what I've tried to do here in phase 2, is I've tried to come alongside the precinct strategy, get your America First patriots down at the lowest level and get them Trump people and America people and all that kind of stuff. Do those things. But then, look at all the other places where you can go on offense. And one of the places you can go on offense are these tests. These tests on obscenity have been revalidated and reaffirmed. Community standards have been assessed to say that there is no national standard for the First Amendment. That means that if you're in rural Oklahoma like I am, rural Oklahoma has different community standards than godless commie California. And if you are in rural California has different community standards than Los Angeles. That's the point I'm making. Is that there is a legal precedent to say that if you are in the rural podunk communities, or if you are in a conservative area of a blue state, there is the ability for you to stand legally with precedent, with the Constitution, with the Bible, with the morality, with ethics, in order to attack and go against these institutions that are disrupting children. Because if they're disrupting the children's minds, like that woman with the eye makeup out of her eyes, if they're disrupting those minds, there is utterly no redeeming social value. Go back and play this clip, phase 2. But walking the dog, you can basically see where there's godlessness and there's godless commies coming in to undermine the society and undermine the culture wherever they're doing that. The workplace, Department of Health, public schools, wherever they're doing that, there is a public interest to not be disrupted by godless communism. That's the public interest. That's what I'm trying to say. The public interest, the Americans have a public interest to not have our institutions disrupted by godless communism. The way that you attack those is by those standards that I just laid out. The standards of Miller, California, which harkens back to Roth versus USA, and basically says, if you're going to try to bring in smut, if you're going to try to bring in the fact that men aren't men and girls aren't girls and they can just be whatever they want to be, if you're going to try to disrupt those things, that's disrupting to society. That is a public issue. It is a public issue if you're trying to say a boy, a biological boy, cannot be a biological boy anymore. That is a matter of public interest. And because it's a matter of public interest, it goes according to the community standard. And because there's not a national community standard, that community standard is determined by that locale. And if that locale is a conservative, Bible-wielding, non-godless commie area, then they can rightly, constitutionally, legally, with precedent, biblically say, no, you cannot do this. The purpose of public school is not to advance godless communism. It's not to advance sexual immorality. It is not to enshrine and institutionalize the critical race theory notion that just because of your skin color, you are morally good or morally bad. Depending on what color you are, determines what your morality is. That is a disruptive idea, not only to America, but to your home. And it's a disruptive idea to that institution. That's how people need to think. That's how people need to start arguing. Now, of course, that doesn't really address the woman that's in the picture talking about bi-erasure and all that kind of stuff. That's where you present the gospel. You bring the gospel to that woman and understand, and I'll go to here. You know what? Let's call that phase 3. So there's phase 2. There's your legal precedent coming alongside the precinct strategy. Understanding that it's not just about getting all the precincts filled with the most America First patriots ever. Because if it's full of a bunch of retirees that got time on their hands, when they die, what happens to the next generation? Are we guaranteed the next generation to step up and fill the gap? No. Okay, so what else can we do? Well, fill the precincts, go on offense, use the court system to attack critical race theory and all these other stuff, especially if you're in blue states with legislators that are like, I'm not going to touch that critical race theory stuff because I don't want to get unelected. Okay, well, you suck. Get rid of those people. But while you're getting rid of those people and you're trying to get a good America First, patriot in the office, why don't you go to the court system and sue along the grounds that there is utterly no redeeming social value, and it's violating the community standards, that the purpose of the institution is not to disrupt the community standards of that area. Legal precedent out the yin-yang. So let's roll the rock and get to a quick phase 3. I did not plan to do this, but I will because I want to do it. Okay, the first thing here is that the phase 3 issue is this woman with the things on her eyes, right? She's talking about biphobic and bi-erasure and all that kind of stuff. Understand. Let's play it again, and don't get weirded out by the video, right? Like, the godless commies are expecting you to see this and be like, wow, look at her, she sucks, and just like, oh wow, she's crazy. They're expecting you to do that. That's the Hegelian dialectic. The Hegelian dialectic is to take the status quo, take the exact opposite of the status quo, and smash the two of them together. And when you smash the two of them together, you actually come up with a third thing, and that is a fusion of the two. So if you see this video and you're like, oh, she's crazy, you are correct. She is, and she's completely lost. Her mind is enslaved and depraved. But if you do that, and that's the limitation of your thinking, that's where you're like, all right, well, she's crazy. We don't want none of that. Then what that does, it allows her to become the opposite of you, right? Because she gets to advance this idea that she's talking about, which is stupid and dumb and unbiblical, and she's going to go to hell because she doesn't believe the gospel. But if she's allowed to do that, and you jam the two of them together, she is going to make the case, culturally, legally, she's going to make the case that her truth is her truth and your truth is your truth. Well, if you believe what's true, but you allow what's true to be equated to just, well, there's an alternative. Her alternative is really crazy and taboo. What you've just done, you've just diminished your notion of truth and elevated her truth. You've actually brought them up to the same. There's no such thing as, biphobic. There's no such thing as bi-erasure. There's no such thing as these things. Like, these are made-up words. They're made-up words that aren't true. And they're used to diminish what truth is in order to introduce deceit. And by introducing this, there's the German dude, Hegel, that's the Hegelian dialect. You take what you don't want, truth, you take objective biblical morality, and you take something that is not that, or the opposite of that, sexual liberation, Epicureanism. Paul struggled with this. He didn't struggle with it, but Paul addressed this in Acts 17. By the way, like on my Subscribe Star, when you see the old-time picture guy and he's like talking, that's Paul at the Areopagus. That's Acts 17. He's bringing the gospel to this godless, heathen, idol-worshipping culture. And how does he do it? He begins by preaching God as a creator. He begins by introducing them who God is and what God has already done for them. So that's why I do what I do. I try to bring God, I try to bring the Bible and introduce that to a godless culture that sucks. And so the Hegelian dialect is by taking this thing that's true and this thing that's not true, you shove them together, you have a third thing. That third thing then becomes the new thing. And now, because we don't effectively deal with this thing that's taboo, the biphobic, bi-erasure woman with the stuff on her things, now because it's going to join the true morality or the status quo, it's not to say the status quo is a true morality, I'm saying that it's going, like, stuff like her is going to join the stuff that we're doing today. And if you don't reject it and get rid of it, meow, it's going to become part of the new status quo. And now the new status quo is going to come up against the next crazy taboo thing. That will be even more crazy and even more taboo. And you might think, well, Jarrin, you can't get much more crazy than that. And I would say, have you lived in 2020 or 2021? Have you read Psalm chapter 106 whenever the Israelites were birthing their babies and sacrificing them on the altars of Molech? That the drums would be beating while the red fire hot idols were so hot that they would put on their babies and the babies would scald to death. This is Psalm 106. They would burn their babies. They would sacrifice their children to fertility gods. Like, that's what was happening out in the open. That's what they believed. Well, that doesn't happen out in the open here in America. Not yet. It certainly happens, I believe, but it's not happening out in the open. So for us to not have that happening out in the open is to say that we are in a morally better position than Psalm chapter 106. But yet Psalm chapter 106 happened 3,000 years ago. Psalms was 1,000 years before Jesus, right? So 3,000 years ago, people were sacrificing their children on the altars out in the open. And this is like a common thing, like people did it. So to think that a woman who's talking about bi-erasure with weird eye makeup, with no nose rings, going whatever, to think that that's like the most taboo is to not understand the nature of depravity, not to understand the nature of man or sin, but it's also not to respect what the Hegelian dialect is designed to do. The Hegelian dialect is designed to purposefully thwart the Christian biblical morality. It's to subvert objective morality, because objective morality is good for all people. It's God-given, right? It's good. And so if you do this, if you take something and you jam-pack it together, you've just created a third thing. That third thing then becomes the status quo, and you introduce the next new thing. How many Hegelian dialect iterations do we have to have until we're sacrificing babies in the statue of Moloch and it's a common thing? That's my point. That's the point I'm making. But as she does this, watch this video again. Don't get like, oh, she's crazy. That's my whole point. Watch this again, and I'll speak to something that she appeals to that gives insight. She is imaging her creator, and she doesn't even know it. Watch this. Let's watch it again.
But my patience has run out. Pansexuality is not inherently biphobic. They are both valid sexualities. Both of them. And while yes, I have seen pansexual people use that label for questionable reasons, they pretty quickly get it once you explain things to them. They do. And not only that, but do you know who likes to use specific or micro labels? Neurodivergent people. Sometimes we just have to do whatever we can to feel safe and comfortable. And using a more specific label can be our outlet for that. If you took all that energy you spend calling people biphobic and saying they're performing bi-erasure and just educated them, there would be less biphobia. There would be less bi-erasure. Because you've explained it, and people will know the difference. I have fucking had it with you guys. Jesus.
Okay, so notice how she always insults Jesus. Never Muhammad, never Gandhi, always Jesus. Interesting. But there's two things that she does, a couple things that she does that images her creator, that proves that she's made in the image of God. And this is how, if you're a Christian, you need to be able to look at this stuff and actually apply this type of thinking, because this is how you engage the culture, right? The Precinct Strategy has no solution for that. Live Local has a solution for that, because Live Local is designed and oriented around preaching the gospel. So how do you preach the gospel to someone like that? That's a great question. Notice what she does. She says that people use micro labels to feel more comfortable and safe. So understand that everyone, according to her worldview, which is garbage, by the way, but she images her creator by saying that people want to feel safe and comfortable. So that assumes that people who do what she says they do by using labels, She assumes and she values the fact that people are afraid and feel unsafe if they don't use the right label. But it's the fear of being unsafe and afraid that she doesn't like. So she does not like people being afraid and unsafe. That is what you need. That's what I would target on very quickly. And I would say you can build your foundation, take refuge. Jesus says, take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus will carry your problems. Lay those at the foot of the cross, and Jesus will protect you. No one will pluck you from his hand. You will not overcome or overwhelm the Alpha, the Omega. No one is in danger when they're in the protection of God. That's the first thing, is that she doesn't like this notion of being in danger or this notion of being unsafe. So she is imaging her creator because she is correctly identifying the fact that people who are afraid and safe, that's a bad thing. That's a bad thing. So I agree with her on that. She just has a bad standard. The standard she uses is not the Bible, but she uses her own standard. But she can't get away from the fact that God gave her the standard that being unsafe and in danger is not a good thing. So that is a standard that God gave her. God gave her the standard that it's bad to be in danger and unsafe. Does that make sense? The second thing she's talking about is she says, just educate them. Just educate them. Just educate that, biphobic people and bi-erasure are two valid sexualities. Well, again, look past that and understand what she's talking about. What she's advancing here is that people have conflict because they don't have recognition what they're trying to be communicating. In other words, because there's miscommunication, the miscommunication begets the conflict. So here again, I would say, Jesus communicates that God's word is truth. Sanctify them by your truth. Thy word is truth. John 17:17. So here I would talk to her and I would ask her, is that true? Could there be any alternatives to what you are saying? Could it be true that bi-erasure necessarily erases and does away with biphobia? I don't understand what these mean, but let's just say that that's the case. Could you be wrong about what you say? And if she says, well, yeah, then I would say, well, how do you ever know what you're certain about? Trying to get her to understand what she's appealing to in truth. Her truth is that bi-erasure and biphobia are two valid sexualities. Well, you understand what she's doing there. She's appealing to the concept of truth. She's appealing to the concept that people can misunderstand truth, but that truth exists. That's what she's doing. Now, again, her standard is her own. Her standard is idolatrous and it's wrong and it's horrible, stupid, wrong, and it's dumb. I'm so smart using so many words. So that's what she's saying. But she's advancing. She's imaging her creator by specifying the fact that truth is misunderstood, but it exists. That's the last point. And then this last one, so that's the first two. This last one that she's talking about is this frustration. The frustration with the tension. The frustration with just the fact that biphobia people and bi-eraser people are against each other. Again, she's imaging her creator because she wants peace. She wants peace. She wants people to not be at war with each other. She wants people to not argue with each other. Now, she's doing it in a really weird way. She's using dumb, stupid words that I don't really understand, that are just arbitrary and stupid. But she wants peace. She wants rest. She wants comfort. She wants love. She's imaging her creator because she is, in her view, seeing things that are against each other that should not be against each other. That's the gospel presentation. The gospel presentation is Jesus came to die for your sin so that there's no tension between you and God. That you are no longer in rebellion against God. That's why he came. Jesus came to solve that discrepancy. There's a gap between the bi-erasure and biphobia, right? And so she is trying to provide the mechanism, the words, and the understanding to fill that gap. That's what she's trying to do. But in the process of her trying to step in that gap to bring peace to the situation, she's imaging her creator. She doesn't know it, but that's exactly what she's doing. And so if you are a Christian, you believe the Bible, and you love Jesus, those are 3 opportunities in that one short video that makes completely garbage sense. But you can step into those situations, take the thing that she's doing, identify the presupposition, right? The presupposition is that truth is confusing, but it can be known. That was the second one. The first one was that, what was it? She was saying, see, like the words don't make sense, but she's basically imaging her creator in the first one, that truth is existing. The second one was that bi-erasure and biphobia are 2 different things, that truth is confusing, but it can be known. And the last one is that she wants peace. She wants love. She doesn't like the combativeness that she finds herself in, so she can find peace. So right there, I mean, like, that's a 1-minute video that I could talk about Jesus right there. Now, not everyone can do that, but I think that's how you do it. And that's why Live Local solves this. Live Local not only solves the precinct strategy because it envelops it, it's bigger than that. It's more existential. It's more ontological. Ontology is just like the study of being. So it's more like foundational to who you are and how you think about the world. And because it recognizes, stop worrying about up here and start worrying about like what you can do. And the first tenet of Live Local is speech. Preach the gospel. You got an issue with vacancies at precincts? Preach the gospel. What message do we advance? Do we message America first? Do we message Donald Trump? Do we message the Constitution? Let's message the gospel, because there's still a lot of Christians that need to hear the gospel. So let's message that, because in the gospel you get property rights, you get limited government, you get national defense, you get strong borders, you get common language, you get all these things that are conservative in politics, but also biblical in their presentation. So let's do that. And then the second thing is, it addresses the court system. Let's see where there's godlessness that's running amok, and let's go directly at it. Let's take the fight directly to them. Let's use biblical precedent. Let's use legal precedent. Let's use Supreme Court rulings to go specifically against critical race theory by using community standards. The court has acknowledged that there's not a national standard. They've basically said, this community is different from that community. So if this community, which is not a godless commie blue Democrat community, if this community is in deep Illinois, for example, that community is suburban, it's rural, it's biblical, it's Christian, it's conservative. That community can tell these other communities in the same state to go pound sand. Why? Because that community is not that community. It's pretty basic in my mind. And then lastly, this culture stuff. There's no culture war. There's no culture war. There's sin. There's sin. So how do you engage sin? Again, if you accept the premise that we are in a culture war, you've already lost. You've already accepted the premise. As soon as you accept the premise, you lose the debate. If you accept the premise that you are in a culture war, then you have lost the debate that your culture is worth defending. You've absolutely lost it. Don't defend your culture, advance your culture. The way that you advance your culture is not through legislative acts. It's not through, well, the governor signed this bill signed this legislation into law, and so we're good now. We've won. No. It's continual. It's effervescent. It's ongoing. It's never gonna stop. Never gonna stop. Keep pounding. Day in, day out. It's warfare. It's warfare. It's a war for the mind. In the eyes, in the ears. It's a warfare. Preach the gospel. You can find more information about me in the links below. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the death, the burial, the resurrection, the good news, the power to salvation. If you believe in the gospel, you're going to go to heaven. You don't believe in the gospel, conscious eternal torment in a lake of fire. It's going to suck, and it doesn't have to, because Jesus has already paid your fine. He already rose from the grave to prove that you don't have to go to hell. The only thing that's going to prevent you from doing that is your own stupid pride, your lack of humility, and not hearing God's voice. You thinking that you can be smarter than the infinite almighty that created all things. Do you really think that your 6-pound brain can understand infinity? Nope. Okay, cool. So don't burn in hell because of that stupid, smug, pugnacious, arrogant perspective. Believe the gospel. I might not like you, but I love you. There's plenty of people I don't like. I don't have to be nice to them. I need to be loving to them. It is loving to tell them the gospel of Jesus Christ because we want people to have salvation from their sin. Appreciate your time. You can find me same time, same place, hopefully tomorrow. I'm Jarrin Jackson. Now go to war.